The stagecoach rattled into Tombstone, Arizona territory on a blistering afternoon in July of 1882, carrying a woman who had not spoken a single word during the entire three-day journey from Santa Fe. Sarah Mitchell pressed herself against the worn leather seat, her green eyes darting nervously at every sound, every shadow that passed the dusty window. The other passengers had learned quickly not to ask questions, though the bruises on her wrists told a story that needed no words. She stumbled onto Allen Street with a carpet bag containing everything she owned, which amounted to 2 dresses, a hairbrush, and $17 she had stolen from the man she had fled. The guilt of that theft warred with the memory of his fists, and she pushed both thoughts away as she stood in the middle of the dusty thoroughfare, blinking against the harsh sunlight. Tombstone sprawled before her, a silver mining boomtown that had exploded from nothing into a chaotic sprawl of wood-frame buildings, canvas tents, and thousands of desperate souls seeking fortune or escape. Sarah needed only the latter. The Grand Hotel stood 3 stories tall on the corner, its painted sign promising respectable lodging. Sarah's practical mind calculated that $17 would buy her perhaps 2 weeks of room and board if she was careful, which meant she needed work immediately. Her stomach clenched with familiar anxiety as she climbed the hotel steps, remembering the last time she had asked someone for help. That memory sent her hand instinctively to her ribs, where the bruises had finally faded to yellow. The hotel lobby smelled of beeswax and tobacco. A clerk with brilliantined hair looked up from his ledger, his expression shifting from professional welcome to something more calculating as he took in her travel-worn appearance and the way she held herself, as if braced for a blow. "I need a room," Sarah said, her voice rusty from disuse. "And I am looking for work. Do you know of any respectable positions available?" The clerk's smile held no warmth. "Depends on your definition of respectable, miss. This is a mining town. Most work for women is in the saloons or the cribs down on 6th Street. Sarah's face burned, but she kept her chin level. "I can read and write. I can cook and clean. I managed a household in Santa Fe." "Household," the clerk repeated, his gaze dropping to her ringless left hand. "Well, there is a dining room here that might need help. The owner is particular about who she hires, though. You would need to speak with Mrs. Chen. She runs the kitchen." 2 hours later, Sarah stood in the hotel kitchen, her hands shaking so badly that she nearly dropped the kettle she was meant to be filling. Mrs. Chen, a formidable Chinese woman whose family had come to California during the gold rush and worked their way across the territories, watched her with shrewd dark eyes. "You are running from something," Mrs. Chen said bluntly. It was not a question. Sarah's throat constricted. She managed a single nod. "A man?" Another nod. Mrs. Chen was quiet for a long moment, then made a decision with a sharp gesture. "You will work breakfast and dinner service in the dining room. You will serve food, pour coffee and tea, clear tables. The pay is $8 a week, plus 1 meal a day, and Sundays off. You steal from me or my customers, I will have the marshal throw you in jail. You work hard and honest, you will have a place here, understood?" "Yes, ma'am," Sarah whispered. Thank you so much. Start tomorrow morning, 4 o'clock. Breakfast service begins at 5. Mrs. Chen turned back to the massive stove where she was preparing the evening meal, then paused. "The bruises on your arms, they will fade. The ones inside take longer, but they do fade, girl. Remember that." Sarah's eyes burned with unexpected tears. She nodded again, not trusting her voice, and fled back to the tiny room she had rented on the hotel's top floor. That night, she lay awake on the narrow bed, listening to the sounds of Tombstone beyond her window. Gunshots echoed from the direction of the saloons. Men shouted and laughed. A piano played something jaunty and out of tune. She pulled the thin blanket up to her chin and wondered if she would ever feel safe enough to sleep through an entire night again. The next morning arrived cold and dark, the desert surrendering its heat the moment the sun disappeared. Sarah dressed in her better dress, a simple gray cotton that buttoned to her throat, and braided her dark blonde hair into a coronet. Her reflection in the small mirror showed a woman of 22 who looked older, her face too thin, shadows under her eyes that spoke of more than one sleepless night. The hotel dining room was elegant by frontier standards, with real tablecloths and matching china. Mrs. Chen ran her kitchen with military precision, and Sarah learned quickly to stay out of the way of the 2 cooks who worked the massive cast-iron stove. Her job was simple in theory. Take orders, serve food, pour coffee, smile at the customers. In practice, her hands trembled every time a man raised his voice, even in laughter. The first morning passed in a blur of scrambled eggs, bacon, hot cakes, and endless pots of coffee. The miners came in hungry and left satisfied, paying their 35 cents for breakfast without complaint. Sarah kept her eyes down, spoke only when necessary, and tried to ignore the way some of the men looked at her. By the time the breakfast rush ended at 8 o'clock, her feet ached and her arms trembled from carrying heavy trays, but she had made it through without dropping anything or bursting into tears. Mrs. Chen gave her an approving nod and a plate of eggs and biscuits. "You did well enough," the older woman said. "Rest now. Dinner service starts at 5. Sarah took her plate to a small table in the corner of the kitchen and ate slowly, savoring every bite. The food was good, better than anything she had eaten in months. The man she had fled, whose name she refused to even think anymore, had been generous with his fists but stingy with meals, especially near the end when his gambling debts had mounted and his temper had grown shorter. She was washing her plate when one of the cooks, a Mexican man named Luis, called out, "New customer out front, take him coffee." Sarah smoothed her apron and pushed through the swinging door into the dining room. The lunch service did not officially start until noon, but Mrs. Chen had a policy of never turning away a paying customer. A single man sat at a table near the window, his back to her, his hat on the chair beside him. Even seated, she could tell he was tall, with broad shoulders under a faded blue shirt. His hair was dark brown, touched with sun-bleached streaks, and needed a trim. She picked up the coffee pot from the sideboard, grateful that her hands were steadier than they had been that morning, and approached the table. "Good morning, sir. Coffee?" He turned to look at her, and Sarah's breath caught. He had the kind of face that would never be called handsome in a classical sense, too weathered and angular for that, but arresting nonetheless. His eyes were a startling pale blue, almost gray, and they held an intelligence and a wariness that she recognized because she saw the same expression in her own mirror. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, and his jaw was shadowed with several days' worth of stubble. He looked to be perhaps 30 years old, give or take a few years. "Yes, ma'am," he said, his voice a low drawl that marked him as coming from somewhere further south, maybe Texas. "Thank you." Sarah lifted the coffee pot, and that was when her hands betrayed her. Perhaps it was the intensity of his gaze, or the way he moved his hand toward his cup, or simply the accumulated exhaustion of the past months catching up with her all at once. The pot began to shake violently, coffee sloshing dangerously close to the rim. Before the hot liquid could spill, before she could set the pot down, or step back, or do anything at all, the cowboy's hands came up and gently, carefully, closed around hers. His palms were warm and calloused, completely engulfing her smaller hands and the coffee pot handle between them. He steadied everything. The pot, her hands, possibly her entire world in that moment. "Easy now," he said quietly, his voice dropping even lower, meant only for her ears. "You are safe here now." Sarah froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She should pull away. She should run. Every instinct screamed at her to flee from a man's touch. Any man's touch. But his hands held hers with such careful gentleness, not grabbing or gripping, but simply supporting. And his eyes held nothing but concern and a deep, bone-weary kindness. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. I was fine all morning, and then suddenly—" "You do not need to apologize," he said, still in that low, calm voice. Together, their hands still joined around the pot, he guided it down to the table. Only when it was safely resting on the cloth did he release her, pulling his hands back slowly, as if afraid of startling a skittish horse. "You have been through something difficult, am I right?" Sarah took a step back, wrapping her arms around herself. The imprint of his warm hand seemed to burn against her skin. "I should get you a menu. Mrs. Chen has beef stew today, and cornbread." "Stew sounds fine." He was still watching her with those unsettling pale eyes, but he did not press. "I am Nathaniel Crawford. Most people call me Nate." She hesitated, then decided there was no harm in a name. He would likely forget her by tomorrow anyway. "Sarah Mitchell." "It is good to meet you, Miss Mitchell. I reckon I will be taking most of my meals here for the foreseeable future, so I expect we will be seeing quite a bit of each other." Sarah nodded and fled back to the kitchen, her cheeks burning. Her hands were shaking again, but for an entirely different reason. She could still feel the warmth of his palms, the strength in those work-roughened fingers, and the extraordinary gentleness with which he had steadied her. When was the last time anyone had touched her without anger or possession? She could not remember. Over the next week, Nate Crawford became a fixture in the hotel dining room. He took breakfast at 6 every morning, sitting at the same table by the window, and returned for dinner most evenings. He was polite and quiet, always saying please and thank you, never making demands. Sarah learned he was a horse rancher, trying to build a small operation in the grasslands north of town. He had come to Tombstone to purchase breeding stock and establish relationships with the mining companies, who always needed horses to pull their wagons and work their mills. She also learned, through careful observation, that he always sat with his back to the wall, that his eyes constantly scanned the room, and that he wore his gun low on his hip in a way that suggested he knew how to use it. Whatever had given him that scar and put that wariness in his eyes, it had not been a simple accident. Nate Crawford was a man who had seen violence and expected to see it again. Sarah understood that. She was a woman who had survived violence and spent every moment braced for its return. Their interactions remained brief and polite. He never asked personal questions, though she sometimes felt his gaze on her as she moved through the dining room. She found herself hyper-aware of his presence, tracking his arrivals and departures, relaxing slightly when he was there, and feeling oddly bereft when he was not. It made no sense. She should be wary of all men, especially one who carried himself like Nate Crawford, with that coiled readiness that suggested danger lurked beneath the polite exterior. But she could not forget the way he had steadied her hands, or the words he had spoken. "You are safe here now." As if he had looked at her and seen everything, all the fear and pain and desperate hope, and wanted to offer whatever comfort he could. On Saturday evening, the dining room was crowded. A large party of miners at one table were growing rowdy, their laughter too loud, their jokes too crude. Sarah kept her distance, taking their orders quickly and efficiently while avoiding eye contact. She had just turned away from their table, relief flooding through her, when one of them reached out and grabbed her wrist. "Hey there, pretty girl," the miner slurred, his breath reeking of whiskey. He must have been drinking before he came in. "Why don't you sit with us a spell? We will make it worth your while." Sarah's vision tunneled. For a moment she was not in Tombstone, but back in Santa Fe, and it was not a drunk miner holding her wrist, but Marcus, his face twisted with rage, demanding to know where she had been, who she had talked to, why dinner was late. The room spun. "Let go," she managed, pulling against his grip. "Please let go." The miner laughed and held tighter. Just being friendly, no need to be stuck up about it. Then Nate was there, rising from his table with a fluid grace that seemed impossibly fast for a man his size. He covered the distance in 3 long strides and placed his hand on the miner's shoulder. His voice remained level and calm, but something in it made the entire room fall silent. "The lady asked you to let go." The miner looked up, his drunken bravado wavering as he took in Nate's size and the cold warning in his eyes. "We were just talking." "No," Nate said quietly. "You were not. Let go of her. Now." For a long moment, the tableau held. Then the miner released Sarah's wrist and raised his hands in mock surrender. All right, no harm meant." Nate did not move until Sarah had stepped safely away, putting half the room between herself and the miner's table. Only then did he turn back to his own seat, but Sarah noticed he angled his chair to keep both her and the rowdy table in his line of sight. Her wrist throbbed where the miner had grabbed her. When she looked down, she could see the red marks from his fingers, and her stomach churned with nausea and memory. She pressed her hand against her mouth and walked quickly toward the kitchen, needing to be away from all the eyes, all the attention. Mrs. Chen took one look at her face and thrust a glass of water into her hands. "Sit. Breathe." Sarah sank onto a stool and focused on taking slow breaths, counting them the way she had learned to do when the panic threatened to swallow her whole. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3. The kitchen was hot and loud with the clatter of pots and the sizzle of meat on the stove, and the familiar chaos somehow helped ground her back in the present. "I am all right," she said finally. "Thank you. I can finish my shift." "Those miners will not bother you again," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "Mr. Crawford made that very clear. He is a good man, that one. You should talk to him. I barely know him." "Time is not the only measure of knowing," Mrs. Chen said, turning back to her pots. "Sometimes you can see a person's character in a single action, He sees you, girl, and I think you see him too. Sarah had no answer for that, so she returned to the dining room and finished her shift. The miners left soon after, shamefaced and quiet. Nate remained until closing, working his way through a piece of apple pie and multiple cups of coffee while reading a week-old newspaper. When Sarah finally approached to refill his cup one last time, he looked up at her with concern evident in his expression. "Are you all right, Miss Mitchell?" "Yes. Thank you for—" She hesitated, not sure how to express her gratitude without sounding pathetic. "For intervening." Any decent man would have done the same. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I do not mean to overstep, but I have noticed you seem frightened much of the time. If you are in some kind of trouble, or if someone is looking for you, I want you to know you can ask for help. I would be glad to provide it, no strings attached." Sarah's throat tightened. "Why? You do not know me." "No," he agreed, "but I know what it looks like when someone is running from something bad. I have done my share of running." He stood, settling his hat on his head. "Think about it. I am staying at the boarding house on 4th Street if you need to find me. Otherwise, I will see you at breakfast." He left exact change for his meal, plus a generous tip, and walked out into the night. Sarah stood holding the coffee pot, staring after him, her thoughts a confused tangle. Part of her wanted to trust him, to believe that he truly meant his offer of help with no ulterior motive, but she had trusted before, and it had nearly destroyed her. How could she risk that again? That night, Sarah lay awake once more, turning the day over in her mind. She kept returning to the moment when Nate had steadied her hands around the coffee pot, and the absolute certainty in his voice when he had said she was safe. He had spoken as if he could make it true through sheer force of will, as if his presence alone could protect her from everything she feared. It was a foolish thought. No one could protect anyone else completely, not in this hard world. But the fantasy was sweet nonetheless, and she fell asleep imagining what it might feel like to truly be safe, truly be free of fear. Sunday was her day off, and Sarah spent it exploring Tombstone. The town was raw and new, most of its buildings less than 3 years old, thrown up hastily to house the flood of fortune seekers who had descended when silver was discovered in the hills. Allen Street was the main thoroughfare, lined with saloons, gambling halls, restaurants, and shops. The streets were unpaved, choking everyone with dust in dry weather and turning to impassable mud when it rained. Sarah avoided the rougher establishments and instead visited the mercantile, where she used a precious dollar to purchase thread and needles. Her dresses were showing wear, and she needed to make them last as long as possible. She also bought a newspaper, eager for any news of the wider world. She was walking back toward the hotel, her small purchases wrapped in brown paper, when she heard a familiar voice. "Miss Mitchell, good afternoon." Nate stood outside the hardware store, a coil of rope over one shoulder. He smiled when he saw her, a slow, genuine expression that transformed his usually serious face. Sarah's heart did a strange little flip in her chest. "Mr. Crawford, good afternoon. Are you enjoying your day off?" "Yes, thank you. It is good to see more of the town." She gestured at his rope. "Are you working today?" "Always something that needs doing on a ranch, even a small one like mine. I am heading back out there this afternoon." He hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Would you like to see it? The ranch, I mean. It is not much yet, just a house and a barn and some corrals, but the land is beautiful. I could drive you out there, show you around, and have you back before supper. Completely respectable, I promise." Every cautious instinct Sarah possessed screamed at her to refuse. Going anywhere alone with a man, even one who had shown her only kindness, was foolish beyond measure. She should thank him politely and walk away. "I would like that," she heard herself say. "Very much." Nate's smile widened. "Excellent. Let me get my wagon and I will pick you up at the hotel in 15 minutes. Sarah returned to her room and changed into her other dress, a faded blue calico that had once been her favorite. She pinned her hair more neatly and splashed water on her face, then studied her reflection with a critical eye. Her cheeks held a faint flush, and her eyes looked brighter than they had in months. She looked alive, she realized. Not just surviving, but actually looking forward to something. The wagon Nate drove was a sturdy farm vehicle pulled by 2 bay horses. He helped Sarah up to the bench seat with the same careful gentleness he had shown when steadying her hands, and she found herself relaxing slightly as they rolled out of town. The afternoon was warm, but not oppressively so, and a breeze carried the scent of sage and dry grass. "How long have you had the ranch?" Sarah asked as Tombstone fell away behind them. "Bought the land 8 months ago. The house was already there, built by a prospector who gave up and went back to California. It needed work, but the bones were solid." Nate guided the horses along a rutted track that wound through the grassland. "I had been working other people's ranches for years, saving every dollar. Finally had enough to start my own place. It is not much compared to the big operations in Texas, but it is mine." There was pride in his voice and satisfaction. Sarah understood that. She had never owned anything of her own, never had the freedom to build something according to her own vision. The idea of it was intoxicating. "Where are you from originally?" she asked. "At San Antonio. My family raised cattle and horses there. I left when I was 18. Something dark passed across his face. "There was a disagreement. Best for everyone that I moved on." Sarah wanted to ask more, but recognized the same wall she herself erected whenever conversation turned too personal. Instead, she looked at the landscape rolling past. The valley was beautiful in its stark way, all gold grass and gray-green sage, with mountains rising purple in the distance. The sky stretched enormous overhead, unmarred by even a single cloud. "There," Nate said, pointing ahead. "That is home." The ranch house sat in a shallow valley where a creek cut through the grassland. It was small, maybe 3 rooms, built of adobe and wood with a pitched roof. The barn was newer, constructed of raw lumber that had not yet weathered to gray. Corrals stretched out from the barn, and Sarah could see perhaps a dozen horses grazing in a nearby pasture. "It is wonderful," she said, meaning it. Nate helped her down from the wagon, and for a moment his hand spanned her waist, steadying her. The contact sent warmth through her entire body, and she stepped back quickly, flustered. If he noticed her reaction, he gave no sign, instead leading her toward the corrals. "These are my breeding stock," he explained, pride evident in every word. "That big sorrel is Duke, my foundation stud. The mares are all good-blooded animals with solid conformation. I am breeding for horses that can handle the desert climate while still having the size and strength for heavy work." Sarah watched the horses mill around the corral, their coats gleaming in the afternoon light. "How many do you have?" 15 right now, including a couple of geldings I use for work and riding. I am hoping to double that by next year." He leaned against the corral fence, his expression distant. "There is good money in horses if you have the patience for it. The mines always need more, and the army is buying too. In 5 years, maybe 10, this could be a substantial operation." "You have a plan," Sarah observed. "You know exactly what you want. I learned early that if you do not have a plan, life will make one for you, and you probably will not like it." He glanced at her. "What about you, Miss Mitchell? What do you want?" The question struck Sarah like a physical blow. What did she want? For months she had wanted only to escape, to survive one more day. Beyond that, she had not dared to dream. "I want to be free," she said quietly. "To make my own choices, to not be afraid anymore. That is a good start." Nate was quiet for a moment, then pushed away from the fence. "Come on, I will show you the house." The interior of the adobe house was sparse but clean. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace taking up most of one wall. A rough-hewn table and 2 chairs sat beneath the window. Through an open doorway, Sarah could see a bedroom, with a simple bed frame and a trunk. Everything was neat and ordered, the home of a man who lived alone and kept his space with military precision. "It needs a woman's touch," Nate said, sounding almost embarrassed. "I am not much for decoration." "It is a good house," Sarah said. She could imagine curtains at the windows, perhaps a rag rug on the floor, shelves for books and dishes. She could imagine making this bare structure into a real home. The thought shocked her with its intimacy, and she pushed it away quickly. "You have done well for yourself, Mr. Crawford." "Nate," he corrected gently. "I think we are beyond formalities, do not you?" "Then you should call me Sarah." "Sarah." He said her name as if testing how it felt, and she liked the way it sounded in his low drawl. "Would you like some coffee? I can get the stove going." They sat at the table drinking coffee that Nate brewed strong and black, and for the first time since fleeing Santa Fe, Sarah felt something unknot in her chest. The house was peaceful, filled with golden afternoon light and the distant sound of horses moving in the corral. Nate was easy company, not pressing her with questions or demanding her attention, content to simply share the space. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said finally, gathering her courage. "The other day, when you helped me with the coffee pot, you said I was safe. How did you know I needed to hear that?" Nate turned his coffee cup in his hands, studying it as if the answer lay in its depths. "I told you I left home when I was 18. What I did not say was why." He took a breath. "My father was a hard man, believed in discipline, in keeping his family in line. He was particularly hard on my mother and my sister. I tried to intervene more than once, and it always made things worse." Sarah's heart clenched. "What happened?" "One night it went too far. I heard my mother screaming, and I ran in to find him beating her. Something in me just snapped. I pulled him off her and we fought, really fought, not just the usual cuffing around. I was bigger than him by then, stronger. I beat him badly enough that he had to see a doctor." "Did he stop hurting her? I do not know. I left that same night. Figured if I stayed, one of us would kill the other eventually." His jaw tightened. "I spent years regretting that I left them there. My mother, my sister. I ran away to save myself, and I abandoned them to him." "You were 18, Sarah said softly. "Just a boy yourself. You cannot blame yourself for that." "I blamed myself for a long time. Still do, some days." He finally looked up, meeting her eyes. "A few years ago, I got a letter from my sister. She had tracked me down somehow, told me that after I left, my mother finally found the courage to leave too. She took my sister and went to live with family in St. Louis. They were safe. They were free. And my sister wanted me to know that what I did that night, standing up to him, had shown my mother that it was possible, that she did not have to just endure it forever." Tears blurred Sarah's vision. "I am glad they got away. So am I. But I learned something from all that. I learned what fear looks like. I learned what it costs to live with violence, always waiting for the next blow to fall. And I swore that if I ever saw someone carrying that same fear, I would help if I could." He reached across the table, not quite touching her hand, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his skin. "So, when I see you flinch at loud noises, when I see your hands shake for no apparent reason, when I see you watching the doors like you expect someone dangerous to walk through them, I know, and I want to help, if you will let me." Sarah could not speak past the lump in her throat. Finally, she managed, "His name was Marcus Thornton. I met him in Santa Fe 2 years ago. He was charming at first, attentive. He courted me properly, brought flowers, took me to church socials. My parents had both died the winter before, and I was alone and grieving, and he made me feel safe. Let me guess," Nate said quietly. "The charm disappeared after you married him." "We never married. I lived with him as his common-law wife, which made it easier to leave, at least legally. But yes, the charm lasted about 3 months. Then he started finding fault with everything I did. The house was not clean enough. Dinner was not cooked right. I spent too much time talking to the neighbor women. It started with criticism, then insults, then—" She touched her ribs unconsciously. "Then worse." "How long were you with him?" "Almost 2 years. I tried to leave 3 times. Twice he found me before I even made it out of town. The 3rd time I made it to Albuquerque. But I had no money and no way to support myself. I had to go back." She closed her eyes, remembering the beating that had followed her return. "A month ago, he came home drunk and lost a lot of money at cards. He was in a rage, breaking things. And I knew that if I did not leave right then, he was going to kill me. So I took money from his coat pocket and ran. I caught the stage to Tucson, then came here because I thought a big mining town would be easy to disappear in. Has he come looking for you? I do not know. I do not think so. Marcus is lazy, and his pride was more wounded than his heart. But I am still afraid every time I see a man with dark hair and a tall build. I am afraid every time someone raises their voice. I am afraid all the time, and I hate it." Nate was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "You are one of the bravest people I have ever met." Sarah laughed, a bitter sound. "Brave? I spent 2 years being beaten and came back for more. I shake when I pour coffee. I am afraid of my own shadow." "You survived," Nate said firmly. "You kept yourself alive through 2 years of hell, and when you finally saw your chance, you took it. You ran with nothing but the clothes on your back and made a new life in a strange town where you did not know anyone. You get up every morning and do your work even though you are terrified. That is not weakness, Sarah. That is courage of the highest order." The tears spilled over then, and Sarah put her face in her hands and wept. She cried for everything she had endured, for the girl she had been before Marcus, for all the fear and pain and desperate hope. She cried until her throat was raw and her eyes swollen, and through it all, Nate simply sat across from her, a steady presence offering no platitudes or false comfort, just patient witness to her grief. When she finally regained control, she found he had set a clean handkerchief beside her hand. She dried her face and blew her nose, feeling simultaneously mortified and oddly relieved. "I am sorry," she said. "I did not mean to fall apart like that. Never apologize for tears. You have earned every one of them." He stood and moved to the stove, refilling both their coffee cups. "Sarah, I want to make you an offer, and I need you to hear the whole thing before you answer." She looked up at him warily. "What kind of offer?" "I need help with this place. Keeping house, cooking, doing the washing and mending. Right now I am trying to do everything myself, and it is not sustainable. I need to focus on the horses and building the herd, not on whether I have clean clothes." He set her coffee in front of her and leaned against the counter, clearly trying to appear non-threatening. "I am offering you a job. You would live here, keep the house, cook the meals. I would pay you the same $8 a week you are making at the hotel, plus room and board. Your own room, with a lock on the door. I would not touch you, would not come near you unless you asked me to. You would be completely safe, and you would be out of town where Marcus could never find you, even if he did come looking." Sarah's mind reeled. "You are offering to let me live here, alone with you? I know how it sounds. It would not be proper by most standards, though out here in the territories people are more practical about such things. But I am not proposing anything improper. You would be an employee, nothing more. If anyone asked, I would say you are my housekeeper, and that would be the truth." "Why?" Sarah asked. "Why would you do this for me?" "Because I see someone who needs help, and I am in a position to offer it, because I think you deserve a chance to build a new life without constantly looking over your shoulder. Because this place is lonely as hell, and it would be nice to have another person around." He met her eyes squarely. "And because, when you walked into that dining room and looked at me, something in my chest shifted. I have not been able to stop thinking about you since, and while I am not fool enough to hope for anything beyond friendship, I would very much like to have you in my life." Sarah's heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. "This is insane. I barely know you." "That is fair, so think about it. Take all the time you need. But know that the offer stands, and if you decide to take it, I will drive into town tomorrow and bring you back here." He glanced at the window, where the light was turning gold with approaching evening. "I should get you back before dark. Mrs. Chen will think I kidnapped you." The ride back to Tombstone passed in silence, but it was a comfortable quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. When Nate stopped the wagon in front of the hotel, he helped Sarah down and tipped his hat to her. "Thank you for coming out today," he said. "It was good having you there. Thank you for showing me your home. It is lovely. My offer stands, Sarah. Whatever you decide, I will respect it. But I hope you will consider it." She watched him drive away, then climbed the stairs to her small room and sat on the bed, her thoughts whirling. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to refuse. Going to live on an isolated ranch with a man she barely knew was madness. He could be lying about his intentions. He could be just like Marcus, all charm and kindness until he had her trapped and alone. But he had not tried to touch her beyond necessary courtesies. He had offered her a locked door, her own space. He had shared his own painful history with no expectation of anything in return. And when he looked at her, she did not see possession or hunger, or the calculating gleam that had lurked behind Marcus's eyes. She saw only respect and kindness and a loneliness that matched her own. Sarah lay back on the narrow bed and tried to imagine it, waking up in that adobe house with morning light streaming through the windows, making coffee in that kitchen, hanging washing on a line while horses grazed nearby, cooking dinner and sitting across from Nate at that simple table, talking about the day. It sounded like a dream, like something that happened to other women in storybooks, not to broken girls who poured coffee with shaking hands. But maybe, just maybe, she could reach for it anyway. The next morning, Sarah arrived for her breakfast shift earlier than usual. She found Mrs. Chen already in the kitchen, preparing her first pots of coffee. "You have made a decision. the older woman said, not asking. How did you know I had a decision to make? Mrs. Chen smiled slightly. Mr. Crawford looked at you very carefully before he left yesterday morning, like a man measuring whether a wild horse might allow him to approach, and you looked at him the same way. So, I knew something had happened. Sarah took a deep breath. He has offered me a job keeping house for him at his ranch. I want to accept, but I'm afraid I'm making a terrible mistake. Are you afraid of him specifically, or just afraid in general? That stopped Sarah short. She considered it carefully, examining her feelings with as much honesty as she could muster. Just afraid in general, she admitted. Nate himself, I trust him. I do not understand why, but I do. Then trust that instinct. Women's intuition exists for a reason. We learn to sense danger because we must. Mrs. Chen poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to Sarah. You have been running on fear for so long that you have forgotten how to recognize what is real and what is memory. This Nate Crawford, he is real, he is kind, he is honorable, and unless I am very much mistaken, he is already falling in love with you. That is ridiculous. He barely knows me. Love does not always require time. Sometimes it strikes like lightning, sudden and undeniable. The question is whether you are brave enough to stand still and let it reach you, or if you will keep running. Mrs. Chen sipped her coffee. I will be sorry to lose you, but I think you should go. Take the chance. Live a little. You are too young to spend the rest of your life afraid. When Nate came in for breakfast, Sarah poured his coffee with steady hands and set a plate of eggs and bacon in front of him. Then she leaned down and said quietly, My answer is yes. I will come work for you. His face transformed, joy and relief, and something deeper flashing across his features before he controlled his expression. I am very glad to hear that. I will come by at noon with the wagon, if that gives you enough time to collect your things. More than enough. I do not have much. Sarah gave Mrs. Chen 2 weeks' notice out of courtesy, but the older woman waved it away. Go today. You have earned the right to start your new life immediately. So, at noon, Sarah stood on the board sidewalk with her carpet bag in hand, watching Nate's wagon roll down Allen Street. The morning shift had been a strange blur of goodbyes and good wishes. Several of the regular customers had expressed surprise and disappointment that she would be leaving, and more than one had made pointed comments about a young woman going to live on an isolated ranch with a bachelor. Sarah had ignored them all, chin high, refusing to be shamed for making her own choices. Nate loaded her bag into the wagon bed and helped her up to the seat. As they left Tombstone behind, Sarah looked back once at the town that had been her sanctuary for such a short time, then firmly faced forward. She was done looking back. From now on, she would look only ahead. The ranch looked different in the bright afternoon light, more solid and permanent. Nate carried her bag into the house and showed her to the second bedroom, which she had glimpsed only briefly on her previous visit. It was small but had a real bed with a rope frame and a straw tick mattress, a dresser with a mirror, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. I put clean sheets on the bed this morning, Nate said, setting her bag on the dresser. And there is a bolt on the door, see? You can lock it from the inside. I am right next door if you need anything, but you have complete privacy. Sarah looked around the room. That would be hers, truly hers, and felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. It is perfect, thank you. You settle in and make yourself comfortable. I need to work with the horses this afternoon, but I will be around if you have questions. He paused at the door. Sarah, I meant what I said. You are safe here. I will never hurt you or allow anyone else to hurt you. You have my word on that. I believe you, she said, and realized it was true. After Nate left, Sarah unpacked her few belongings and explored the house more thoroughly. The kitchen was well stocked with staples: flour, cornmeal, beans, coffee, salt pork. She found a root cellar dug into the ground outside the back door, containing potatoes, onions, and some withered apples. There was clearly enough food for her to make decent meals, which was a relief. She spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning the house from top to bottom, not because it was particularly dirty, but because she needed to learn the space, to make it familiar. She swept the floors, washed the windows, organized the kitchen shelves. She found sheets and blankets in a trunk and aired them out in the sunshine. Physical work had always helped calm her mind, and by the time evening approached, she felt more settled. For dinner, she made something simple: beans with salt pork, cornbread, and coffee. She set the table carefully, using the mismatched plates and cups she had found in the cupboard, and even put a few wildflowers she had picked near the creek in a jar for a centerpiece. Nate came in at dusk, dusty and tired, and stopped short when he saw the table. "This is wonderful," he said, genuine pleasure in his voice. "I have not had a proper meal at this table since I moved in. It is just beans and cornbread. It is the first meal someone else cooked for me in longer than I can remember. That makes it special." They ate together as the last light faded from the sky, and stars began to emerge overhead. Nate told her about his afternoon, about the mare who was proving difficult to train and the foal who showed exceptional promise. Sarah told him about her inventory of the kitchen and asked what supplies he needed from town. Their conversation was easy and comfortable, like old friends rather than virtual strangers. After dinner, Sarah washed the dishes while Nate sat at the table mending a piece of tack by lamplight. The domestic scene felt surreal, almost too good to be true. She kept waiting for something to shatter it, for Nate to reveal his true nature, for her own fear to overwhelm her. But the moment stretched into an hour, then two, and nothing bad happened. They simply existed together in the quiet house, sharing space peacefully. "I should turn in," Nate said finally, standing and stretching. "Morning comes early. Thank you again for dinner, Sarah, and for being here. It already feels different, having you around." "Better. Good night, Nate." Sarah retreated to her room and closed the door, then stood for a moment with her hand on the bolt. Finally, she left it unlatched. Some gesture of trust seemed important, even if he would never know. She changed into her nightgown and lay down in the unfamiliar bed, expecting to toss and turn for hours as she usually did. Instead, she fell asleep almost immediately, lulled by the profound silence of the ranch and the knowledge that she was, for the first time in years, truly safe. The next weeks fell into a rhythm that felt both strange and achingly right. Sarah rose before dawn and made coffee, started breakfast while Nate did the early morning barn chores. They ate together as the sun rose, then he disappeared to work with the horses while Sarah tackled the endless domestic tasks: washing, mending, cleaning, cooking, tending the small vegetable garden Nate had started behind the house. The work was hard and constant, but it was hers to manage as she saw fit, and that made all the difference. Nate was as good as his word. He never entered her room, never touched her beyond the occasional brush of hands when passing plates at the table. He treated her with unfailing courtesy and respect, asking her opinion on household matters, thanking her for her work. He was teaching her to read the desert, pointing out plants that were useful or dangerous, showing her how to track water sources and read the weather in the shape of clouds. Slowly, so slowly Sarah almost did not notice it happening, she began to relax. The constant tension that had lived in her shoulders started to ease. She no longer jumped at every sudden noise. She found herself smiling more, even laughing at Nate's dry observations about the personalities of his horses. She slept through the night without nightmares and woke feeling rested. She was healing, she realized. Here in this simple adobe house with this quiet, kind man, she was becoming whole again. One evening, about 6 weeks after Sarah's arrival, they finished dinner and Nate suggested they sit outside to enjoy the cooler air. Sarah brought her mending and settled on the rough bench Nate had built against the house's front wall. The sunset painted the western sky in shades of orange and pink, and the horses in the nearby pasture were dark silhouettes against the fading light. "This time of day is my favorite," Nate said, sitting beside her with comfortable distance between them. "Everything goes quiet and peaceful." "It is beautiful," Sarah agreed. She focused on her needle and thread, repairing a tear in one of Nate's work shirts. "I never imagined I could be this content. After everything that happened, I thought I was broken forever." "You were hurt. That is not the same as broken." "Maybe not. But I felt broken. I felt like Marcus had destroyed something fundamental in me, something I would never get back." She tied off her thread and reached for the scissors. "But being here, working with you, having my own space and my own purpose, it is like I am remembering who I used to be, or maybe discovering who I can be." "You can be anything you want," Nate said quietly. "You are strong enough." Sarah looked over at him, this man who had shown her such unexpected kindness, and felt her heart swell with affection and gratitude. He sat relaxed, one ankle crossed over his knee, his face turned toward the sunset. The last light caught the lines around his eyes and emphasized the silver just beginning to show at his temples. He was handsome, she realized, in a hard-worn, thoroughly masculine way. More importantly, he was good. "Nate," she said softly, "can I ask you something? Anything? Do you ever get lonely out here?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," he admitted finally. "I have been alone most of my adult life, by choice more than circumstance. After leaving home, I did not trust easily, did not let people close. It was safer that way, or so I thought. But the older I get, the more I realize that safety is not the same as happiness." "Is that why you asked me to come here? Because you were lonely?" "Partly, but not just for company, Sarah, specifically for your company." He turned to look at her directly. "I told you before that something shifted in me when I first saw you. I have been trying to be respectful, to give you space and time, to not pressure you in any way, but I would be lying if I said my feelings were purely friendly." Sarah's pulse quickened. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I care about you, more than I probably should, given how short a time we have known each other. I am saying that I look forward to breakfast because I get to sit across from you, that I work harder on the ranch because I want to build something worthy of you, that I lie awake at night in my room, knowing you are just on the other side of the wall, and I think about what it would be like to have the right to hold you." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated with himself. "I am saying all this badly. The point is, I have feelings for you, Sarah, deep feelings, and I needed you to know that, even though I am not asking for anything in return." Sarah set down her mending with shaking hands, but this time the trembling came from emotion, not fear. "You are not saying it badly, and you are not alone in those feelings." Hope flashed across Nate's face. "Truly?" "Truly. I did not realize it at first, because I was so focused on just surviving. But somewhere along the way, survival turned into living, and living turned into hoping. Hoping for things I thought I would never want again." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I care about you too, Nate. I trust you. I feel safe with you. And lately, I've been thinking about what it would be like if we were more than employer and employee, more than housemates. If we were actually partners." "Partners," Nate repeated, testing the word. "I like the sound of that." "So do I." Sarah stood up, her mending forgotten, and walked to the edge of the porch. Nate joined her, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body. "I am still afraid sometimes. I still have bad moments where everything feels too close and too much. I do not know if I am ready for everything that a real relationship would entail." "We go at whatever pace you need," Nate said firmly. "There is no rush. We have time, Sarah, all the time you need." She turned to face him, tilting her head back to meet his eyes in the gathering dusk. "Can I ask for something? Anything? Will you hold me? Just hold me. I want to know what it feels like to be held by someone who cares, who will not hurt me." "Come here," Nate said gently, opening his arms. Sarah stepped into his embrace, and it was like coming home. His arms came around her carefully, giving her plenty of room to pull away if she wanted, but she did not want to pull away. She wanted to sink into his warmth and solidity, to feel his heartbeat steady under her cheek, to be surrounded by his strength, and know that it would never be turned against her. They stood like that for a long time, wrapped together as the stars emerged and the desert night settled around them. Sarah felt tears slide down her cheeks, but they were not tears of grief or fear. They were tears of relief, of release, of finally letting go of the last vestiges of the terror that had ruled her life for so long. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. "Thank you for seeing me, for helping me, for being exactly who you are." "Thank you for trusting me," Nate replied, his voice rough with emotion. "For giving me a chance, for being here." When they finally pulled apart, Nate cupped Sarah's face gently in his calloused hands and wiped away her tears with his thumbs. "You are so beautiful," he said quietly. "Inside and out. I hope you know that." Sarah stood on her toes and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek, then stepped back before she could lose her nerve. "Good night, Nate." "Good night, Sarah." She retreated to her room, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. That night, for the first time since coming to the ranch, she did not close her door all the way. She left it open just a crack, a silent acknowledgement that she was ready to let someone in. The relationship that developed between Sarah and Nate over the following months was unlike anything Sarah had experienced before. They spent their days working side by side, falling into easy conversation about everything and nothing. Nate taught her to ride, starting her on his gentlest mare and laughing with delight when Sarah cantered across the pasture for the first time, her face glowing with exhilaration. Sarah taught Nate that meals could be more than just fuel, preparing dishes with care and attention that made even simple ingredients special. They touched more freely now. A hand on the small of her back as he passed behind her in the kitchen, her fingers resting on his forearm when she wanted his attention. Quick embraces when one of them left for town or returned home. Each touch built Sarah's trust and helped rewrite the associations she had formed around physical contact. Touch could be gentle. Touch could be comforting. Touch could be an expression of affection rather than possession. They also talked, really talked, in a way Sarah had never managed with anyone else. She told Nate about her childhood, about her parents and the small farm where she had grown up. She told him about her dreams before Marcus, about wanting to be a teacher, about the books she had loved to read. Nate talked about his years wandering the territories, about the ranches where he had worked, about the night sky and the horses and the vast lonely spaces he had learned to love. He told her about his regrets and his hopes, about the family he had left behind and the family he someday hoped to create. "I want children," he said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. 3 or 4 of them, running around and filling this house with noise. "I want to be the kind of father mine never was, patient and kind and present. I want to build something that lasts beyond just me." "That sounds wonderful," Sarah said softly. The idea of children had terrified her when she was with Marcus, but with Nate, it felt different, safe. "I always wanted a family too, a real family built on love instead of fear." "We could have that," Nate said, taking her hand. "If you wanted. Not right now, I am not trying to rush you. But someday, if you were ready, we could marry. We could build that life together." Sarah's heart raced. "You are asking me to marry you?" "I am saying I want to marry you when you are ready. There is no pressure, no timeline. But I love you, Sarah Mitchell, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. So whenever you feel ready to take that step, you just say the word and I will ride into Tombstone and buy you the prettiest ring in the territory." "I love you too," Sarah whispered, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. "I do not know when I will be ready, but I know that I want that future with you. I want all of it." Nate raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "Then that is enough for now." As autumn arrived and the desert cooled, Nate's ranch began to truly thrive. He sold several horses to the mining companies at good prices and used the proceeds to purchase more breeding stock. He hired a young man named Tom to help with the heavy work, which gave him more time to focus on training and breaking the young horses. Sarah expanded the garden and put up preserves for the winter, filling the root cellar with jars of vegetables and fruit. The house began to feel like a true home, comfortable and lived in and full of quiet joy. In November, Sarah made a decision. She found Nate in the barn one afternoon, working with a skittish yearling, and waited until he finished before approaching. "I want to tell you something," she said without preamble. "I am ready. If your offer still stands, I want to marry you." Nate froze, the lead rope still in his hands. "Are you certain?" "There is no rush, Sarah. We can wait as long as you need." "I am certain. I have been certain for weeks. I was just afraid to say it out loud. But I do not want fear to dictate my life anymore. I want to move forward. I want to be your wife." The smile that broke across Nate's face was pure sunshine. He dropped the lead rope and crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides, sweeping her up in his arms and spinning her around. Sarah laughed, clinging to his shoulders, dizzy with happiness and relief and anticipation. "When?" Nate asked, setting her down but keeping his arms around her. "How soon can we do this?" "As soon as you want. We could go into town tomorrow if the pastor is available." "Tomorrow," Nate agreed. "Tomorrow sounds perfect." They rode into Tombstone the next morning in the wagon, both dressed in their best clothes. Sarah wore her blue calico dress, carefully mended and pressed, and had woven wildflowers into her braided hair. Nate had shaved and put on a clean white shirt and his one good jacket. They looked like what they were, 2 people utterly in love, ready to commit to a shared future. The pastor at the Episcopal Church agreed to marry them that very afternoon. Mrs. Chen came as a witness, beaming with pride and insisting on hosting a small celebration dinner at the hotel afterward. As Sarah stood before the altar and repeated her vows, promising to love and honor Nate in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, until death parted them, she felt the last chains of her past fall away. She was no longer the frightened woman who had fled Santa Fe. She was Sarah Crawford now, wife and partner and builder of her own destiny. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife and told Nate he could kiss his bride, Nate cupped Sarah's face with infinite gentleness and pressed his lips to hers. It was Sarah's first real kiss, tender and sweet and full of promise. She kissed him back, pouring all her love and trust and hope into that connection, and felt him smile against her mouth. "I love you, Mrs. Crawford," he whispered. "I love you too, Mr. Crawford." The celebration at the hotel was small but joyful. Mrs. Chen had prepared a feast, and several of the regular customers from Sarah's time working there came to offer congratulations. Tom, Nate's hired hand, played the fiddle and insisted on at least one dance. Nate proved to be surprisingly graceful, guiding Sarah around the dining room floor while everyone clapped and cheered. As the sun set and they prepared to return to the ranch, Sarah felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Less than 6 months ago, she had arrived in Tombstone with nothing but fear and 17 stolen dollars. Now she had a home, a husband, a future full of possibility. The transformation seemed impossible, like something from a fairy tale. "What are you thinking about?" Nate asked as they drove through the darkening landscape. "About how much has changed, about how lucky I am." "We are both lucky," Nate corrected. "I certainly never expected to find someone like you. I had resigned myself to a lonely life, and then you walked into the dining room and everything shifted. Do you remember what you said to me that first morning, when I was trying to pour your coffee and my hands were shaking? I said you were safe. You made it true," Sarah said softly. "You promised me safety, and you delivered it. You gave me space to heal, time to learn to trust again. You never pressured me or made me feel like I owed you anything. You just loved me, patiently and steadily, until I was strong enough to love you back. You were always strong, Sarah. You just needed a safe place to remember that." When they arrived back at the ranch, Nate helped Sarah down from the wagon and then, without warning, swept her up into his arms. "What are you doing?" Sarah laughed. "Carrying my bride over the threshold. It is tradition." He carried her into the house and set her down gently in the middle of the kitchen. The lamps were lit, making the space glow with warm light. Sarah looked around at the home they had built together, then turned to her husband. "Nate, I want you to know that I am ready for everything that marriage entails. I am not afraid anymore." His expression turned serious. "Are you absolutely certain? We do not have to rush anything. I am content to wait as long as you need." "I am certain," Sarah said firmly. She reached up and began unpinning her hair, letting it fall in waves around her shoulders. "I trust you completely. I love you, and I want to truly be your wife in every way." Nate closed the distance between them and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that had been carefully restrained until now. Sarah kissed him back just as fiercely, pouring all her love and desire and newfound freedom into the embrace. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nate took her hand and led her to his bedroom, which would now be their bedroom. That night, Sarah learned that physical intimacy could be beautiful. In Nate's arms, she discovered that her body was capable of pleasure, not just pain. He was endlessly patient and gentle, taking his time, making sure she felt safe and cherished every moment. When fear threatened to surface, he stopped immediately and held her until she relaxed again. He turned something she had dreaded into something wonderful, an expression of love and connection that left her feeling whole and powerful and deeply satisfied. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Nate pressed a kiss to her forehead and whispered, "Thank you for trusting me, for giving me this gift." "Thank you for making me feel beautiful," Sarah replied, "for making me feel like myself again. You are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen, inside and out, and I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know that." Sarah fell asleep in her husband's arms, safe and loved and happier than she had ever imagined possible. The winter that followed was the best of Sarah's life. The ranch settled into a slower rhythm as the weather cooled and the work eased slightly. Sarah and Nate spent long evenings by the fire, reading aloud to each other or simply talking, learning the details and depths of each other's souls. They made love often, each time building Sarah's confidence and helping her reclaim her body as her own. Nate was endlessly creative and attentive, learning what she enjoyed and what made her uncomfortable, always putting her pleasure and comfort first. In January, Sarah realized she had missed her monthly courses. At first, she thought it was stress or simply her body still recovering from years of poor treatment. But when a second month passed without bleeding, she began to suspect the truth. She waited until she was certain before telling Nate, afraid to get his hopes up prematurely. Finally, on a cold February morning, she took his hand as they finished breakfast and said, "I think I am with child." Nate went absolutely still. "You think?" "I am fairly certain. My courses have stopped, and I have been feeling sick in the mornings. I think it happened shortly after we married." "A baby," Nate said wonderingly. Then he let out a whoop of pure joy and pulled Sarah into his arms, spinning her around the kitchen. "We are going to have a baby," Sarah laughed, clinging to him. "I was hoping you would be happy." "Happy, Sarah, I am ecstatic. This is everything I have ever wanted." He set her down and immediately began fussing. "You should sit down. Should you be working? Do you need anything? Are you feeling all right?" "I am fine," Sarah assured him, charmed by his concern. "Women have babies all the time. I am not fragile." But Nate insisted on treating her like spun glass anyway, taking over all the heavy chores and making sure she rested frequently. Sarah tolerated his hovering because she knew it came from love, though she drew the line at being banned from the kitchen entirely. As her pregnancy progressed and her belly swelled with new life, Sarah felt a sense of completeness she had never experienced before. She was creating a family with a man she loved, bringing a child into a home filled with safety and affection. The future stretched bright before her, full of possibility. The baby arrived on a sweltering day in early September, after a labor that lasted nearly 20 hours. Nate had ridden into Tombstone to fetch the midwife the moment Sarah's pains began, and he stayed by her side through the entire ordeal, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement, even when she cursed him for getting her into this situation in the first place. When the midwife finally placed a squalling, red-faced infant in Sarah's arms and announced, "It is a boy, healthy and strong," Sarah burst into exhausted tears. A son? She had a son. "He is perfect," Nate said hoarsely, staring at the tiny creature with absolute awe. "Look at him, Sarah. Look at what we made." They named him James, after Nate's grandfather, and he was indeed perfect. Dark hair like his father, green eyes like his mother, and a stubborn temperament that clearly came from both sides. Sarah had worried that motherhood might trigger bad memories or fears, but instead, she found it deeply healing. Every time she held James, every time she nursed him or rocked him or sang him to sleep, she was rewriting her understanding of what love meant. This small person depended on her completely, and she would protect him with everything she had. She would make sure he grew up knowing only kindness and security, never fear. Nate proved to be exactly the kind of father he had promised to be. He woke from midnight feedings without complaint, walked the floor with James during colicky evenings, and made ridiculous faces to elicit baby smiles. Sarah would sometimes watch him cradling their son, speaking to him in that low, gentle voice, and feel so full of love that she thought her heart might burst. 2 years later, Sarah gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth, who had her father's pale eyes and her mother's determination. 3 years after that came another boy, Michael, who was quieter than his siblings, but no less loved. The adobe house, once so empty and silent, filled with the noise and chaos of family life. The ranch prospered as well, growing from Nate's small operation into a respected breeding facility known throughout the territory for producing excellent horses. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Sarah and Nate took a rare evening to themselves while Tom's wife watched the children. They rode out to a high point overlooking the ranch, watching the sun set over land that had become truly theirs. "Do you ever think about that first morning?" Sarah asked, leaning back against Nate's chest as they sat together on a blanket. "When you steadied my hands?" "All the time," Nate admitted. "I think about how close I came to never knowing you. If I had taken breakfast somewhere else that day, if you had been working a different shift, our entire lives would have been different." "I think we still would have found each other somehow," Sarah said. "I think we were meant to find each other." "Maybe so." Nate pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I know I have told you this before, but I am so grateful you took a chance on me, that you trusted me enough to come here, to build this life with me. I am grateful you saw me when I was invisible to everyone else, that you offered safety without asking for anything in return. You saved my life, Nate. In every way that matters, you saved me. We saved each other, Nate corrected. Before you, I was just going through the motions, building something without really understanding why. You gave me purpose. You gave me a family. You made this house a home. They sat together as the stars emerged, comfortable in the silence that came from a decade of shared life. Sarah thought about the woman she had been, trembling as she poured coffee, afraid of her own shadow. That woman seemed like a stranger now, someone from another life entirely. The woman she had become was strong and confident, a mother and wife and partner in every sense. She had not just survived her trauma, but had transformed it into something beautiful. "Do you ever regret it?" Nate asked quietly. "Taking on a hard life on a remote ranch instead of something easier?" "Never," Sarah said firmly. "Not once. This life, this family, this love, it is everything I ever wanted and more than I dared to dream. I would not change a single thing." Nate turned her in his arms so he could kiss her properly, still as gentle and passionate as their very first kiss. "I love you, Sarah Crawford, today, tomorrow, and every day after that until my last breath." "I love you too," Sarah whispered against his lips. "Always and forever." They returned to the house as full darkness fell, walking hand in hand through the cool evening air. Through the window, Sarah could see Tom's wife reading a story to the children, all three of them clustered around her on the sofa. James was 10 now, trying hard to act too old for bedtime stories, but clearly still enthralled. Elizabeth was 8, listening with rapt attention. Michael, at 5, was fighting sleep but losing the battle. "They are good children," Nate observed. "We are very lucky. We made them that way," Sarah said, "by giving them what we never had, safety, stability, unconditional love. They will grow up knowing their worth, knowing they are cherished. They will never doubt that they are wanted." They collected their sleepy children and tucked them into bed, then retreated to their own room. As Sarah lay in her husband's arms, listening to his heartbeat and feeling the solid warmth of his body against hers, she thought about the strange and winding path that had brought her to this moment. The pain, the fear, the desperate flight, all of it had been necessary to lead her here, to this place of peace and belonging. She had poured coffee with trembling hands, and a kind cowboy had steadied them and promised her safety. That promise had transformed into love, and that love had built a family, and that family had created a legacy that would extend far beyond either of them. It was, Sarah thought, the best possible ending to a story that had begun in darkness. Not an ending at all, really, but a beginning. The beginning of everything that mattered. Years continued to pass, each one building on the foundation Sarah and Nate had created together. The ranch expanded steadily, eventually encompassing over 2,000 acres of prime grazing land. Nate hired additional hands to help manage the growing operation, and Tom became his foreman and trusted friend. Sarah managed the household with the same efficiency she had once brought to Mrs. Chen's hotel kitchen, though on a much larger scale. James grew into a serious young man who loved the horses as much as his father did. By the time he was 15, he was Nate's right-hand man on the ranch, with an intuitive understanding of the animals that promised he would be an excellent horseman in his own right. Elizabeth proved to be the scholar of the family, devouring every book she could get her hands on and begging Sarah to teach her everything she knew. Sarah began giving her daughter formal lessons, working from the same primers she remembered from her own schooling, and discovered that Elizabeth had a gift for learning. Michael was the dreamer, often found sketching the desert landscape or making up elaborate stories to tell his siblings. In 1894, when Sarah was 34 years old, she gave birth to one more child, a daughter they named Rose. This late addition to the family was unexpected but deeply welcomed, and she became the darling of the household, doted on by her older siblings and parents alike. That same year, Arizona Territory saw significant changes as more settlers arrived and towns grew into cities. Tombstone's silver boom had faded, but other communities thrived. Nate and Sarah discussed the future extensively, eventually deciding to purchase a small house in the growing town of Tucson to serve as a base for the children's education. They would split their time between the ranch and town, ensuring their children had access to proper schools while maintaining the business that supported them. James, at 17, chose to stay on the ranch full-time, taking on more responsibility for the day-to-day operations. "This is my future too," he told his parents firmly. "I want to build on what you have started. Someday this will be my ranch, and I want to know every inch of it." Nate and Sarah agreed, proud of their son's dedication and maturity. Elizabeth enrolled in the academy in Tucson and thrived in the more structured educational environment. Michael and young Rose would join her in a few years when they were old enough. Through all these changes and expansions, the core of Sarah and Nate's relationship remained constant. They still sat together on the porch most evenings, talking about their day and making plans for the future. They still made love with the same passion and tenderness that had marked their wedding night, their connection deepening rather than fading with time. They still looked at each other and saw the same wonder and gratitude that had sparked that first morning in the hotel dining room. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset from their usual spot, Nate said, "I was thinking about something today. If you could go back and tell that frightened woman who poured my coffee 15 years ago what her life would become, what would you say?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "I would tell her to hold on, that the fear will not last forever, that there is a man coming who will see her, truly see her, and love what he sees, that she will build a life beyond anything she can imagine, full of love and purpose and joy." She paused. "But I do not think she would believe me. I am not sure I would have believed it was possible. Life has a way of surprising us," Nate said. "I certainly never expected to find you. I had accepted loneliness as the price of independence. Then you appeared and changed everything." "Do you ever wonder what happened to Marcus?" Sarah asked. It was rare that she spoke his name anymore. The man who had once dominated her life reduced to little more than an unpleasant memory. "Sometimes. Though honestly, I do not much care as long as he stays far away from you and our family." "I heard he left Santa Fe a few years after I did," Sarah said. "Someone passing through mentioned seeing him in California, still gambling and drinking too much. I felt sorry for him, which surprised me. I spent so long hating him and fearing him, but now I just feel pity. He will never have what we have because he does not know how to build anything that lasts. He only knows how to destroy." "His loss is my gain," Nate said, pulling her close. "Though I would never wish for anyone to suffer what you suffered. I am just grateful that you found the strength to escape, and that you somehow ended up in my life. Our paths were meant to cross," Sarah said with certainty. "I believe that absolutely. Every hardship, every difficult choice, every moment of terror and doubt, all of it led me to you. And I would endure it all again if this was the destination." By 1900, as the new century dawned, the Crawford Ranch was one of the most successful horse breeding operations in southern Arizona. James had married a local rancher's daughter named Clara, and they were expecting the first grandchild. Elizabeth had completed her education and surprised everyone by accepting a position as a teacher in Tucson, using her gift for learning to help other children. Michael, at 14, had discovered a talent for horse training that exceeded even his father's considerable skill. And Rose, at 6, was already showing signs of being as strong-willed and capable as her mother. Sarah and Nate celebrated their 18th wedding anniversary quietly, just the two of them at the ranch house. The children were all in Tucson, or at James and Clara's new home on the northern section of the ranch, giving them rare solitude. 18 years, Sarah mused as they prepared dinner together. It seems impossible that it has been that long, and yet I can barely remember what life was like before you. I know exactly what you mean. The time before you feels like someone else's life. Nate wrapped his arms around her waist from behind as she stirred a pot on the stove. "You know what I have been thinking about lately? Tell me. How this house is going to feel empty again once Rose is grown and gone. Maybe we should think about building onto it, creating space for when the grandchildren visit. I want this to be the heart of the family, the place everyone comes home to." "I love that idea," Sarah said, leaning back against him. "A proper family compound, passed down through generations. The Crawford legacy." "Our legacy," Nate corrected. "Everything I built because of you. This ranch, this family, this entire life exists because you took a chance on me. We took a chance on each other," Sarah said, turning in his arms to face him. "And it paid off beyond either of our wildest dreams." They made love that night with the slow, thorough attention of longtime lovers who knew every inch of each other's bodies and souls. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in their bed, Sarah felt a profound sense of contentment. This was what she had been searching for all along, even when she had not known what she was searching for. A partnership built on mutual respect, trust, and abiding love. A place where she could be fully herself without fear or pretense. A man who saw her strength and her vulnerability and cherished both equally. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Nate asked sleepily. "For being exactly who you are, for never trying to change me or control me, for loving me without conditions or reservations, for building this beautiful life with me." Nate pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Thank you for letting me love you, for trusting me with your heart after it had been so badly broken, for making me a father and a husband and a better man than I ever thought I could be." They fell asleep in each other's arms, as they had every night for 18 years and would for many years to come. The years flowed on, bringing more grandchildren and watching the family tree branch and grow. Sarah delighted in her role as grandmother, spoiling her grandchildren shamelessly, while also teaching them the same lessons she had taught her own children: be kind, work hard, value people over possessions, and never accept cruelty from anyone. James and Clara gave them 5 grandchildren total, and the younger Crawford siblings eventually married and had families of their own. The ranch house that had once sheltered just 2 lonely people now rang with the laughter and chaos of multiple generations gathering for Sunday dinners and holidays. On Sarah's 50th birthday in 1910, the entire family assembled for a celebration. The house overflowed with people, from tiny toddlers to James's eldest daughter, now a young woman of 16. Someone had strung paper decorations, and Clara had baked an enormous cake. Sarah stood in the midst of the celebration, overwhelmed by the sheer abundance of love surrounding her. "What are you thinking about?" Nate asked, appearing at her elbow with a glass of lemonade. "About how impossible all of this would have seemed to me once upon a time. Look at what we created, Nate. Look at this family, this legacy. We built something that will outlast us by generations." "We did indeed." Nate clinked his glass against hers in a toast. "To us, and to 30 more years together." "At least 30, Sarah agreed. They were granted 28. In the spring of 1938, Nathaniel Crawford passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 86, his hand clasped in Sarah's, as it had been for 56 years of marriage. Sarah was 88 years old, and though she grieved the loss of her partner profoundly, she also felt deep gratitude for the long, full life they had shared. At Nate's funeral, their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren gathered to celebrate a man who had lived with integrity and kindness. Speaker after speaker rose to share stories of Nate's patience, his wisdom, his gentle humor, and his unwavering dedication to family. Sarah listened to them all, tears streaming down her weathered face, proud beyond measure of the man she had married and the legacy he left behind. After the service, James took his mother's arm and walked with her through the ranch, showing her all the improvements and expansions that had been made over the years. "A father built something remarkable here," James said, "but you were the foundation of it all, Mother. You gave him the stability and support he needed to dream big. You raised us to value hard work and kindness. Everything good about this family flows from you." "Your father and I built it together," Sarah corrected gently. "We were partners in every sense. I could not have done any of this without him, and he could not have done it without me. That is what partnership means." Sarah lived another 5 years, spending her final days surrounded by family in the house she and Nate had made into a home. She told stories to her great-grandchildren about the old days, about Tombstone in its wild prime, and about the cowboy who had steadied her trembling hands and promised her safety. She told them about choosing courage over fear, about building something beautiful from broken pieces, about the transformative power of love freely given. On a warm summer evening in June of 1943, Sarah Crawford passed away peacefully at the age of 83. Her children buried her beside Nate on a hill overlooking the ranch, under the vast Arizona sky they had both loved. The headstone read simply, "Sarah Crawford, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. 1860 to 1943. She was safe here." The Crawford Ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down through James's line and eventually through his children and grandchildren. The story of Nate and Sarah became family legend, told and retold until it took on the quality of myth. But the children and grandchildren who inherited the ranch also inherited something more valuable than land or horses. They inherited the knowledge that love could heal even the deepest wounds, that kindness was never wasted, and that a life built on mutual respect and partnership would always endure. The adobe house was eventually expanded and renovated, but the original structure remained at its heart, a testament to the two people who had first made it a home. The porch where Nate and Sarah had spent so many evenings still stood, now weathered and worn, but sturdy. Future generations of Crawfords sat there to watch the sunset, to talk about their days, to plan for the future, unknowingly following in the footsteps of the couple who had started it all. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light turned golden and the air smelled of sage and dry grass, family members swore they could feel a presence on that porch, not frightening, but comforting. The feeling of being watched over, protected, loved. The feeling of being safe, here and always. Because that was the true legacy Nate and Sarah Crawford left behind. Not wealth or land or bloodlines, but the unshakable certainty that love was worth fighting for, that broken people could heal and thrive, and that home was not a place but a person, a partnership, a promise kept across decades. Their story had begun with trembling hands and a soft-spoken assurance of safety. It had grown into something neither could have imagined in their wildest dreams. And it endured, generation after generation, a testament to the power of choosing hope over fear, love over loneliness, and building something beautiful from the ashes of the past. The Crawford family gathered every year for a reunion at the ranch, bringing together branches that had spread across the country and even the world. But they always came back to this place, this land, this home. And they told the story of Nate and Sarah, making sure every new generation understood where they came from and what their ancestors had overcome to create the family they now enjoyed. The story was told in different ways depending on the teller, but certain elements remained constant. A frightened woman fleeing an abusive relationship, a kind cowboy who saw her fear and offered protection, trembling hands steadied over a coffee pot, and the simple words that changed everything. "You are safe here now." Those words had proven prophetic in ways Nate could never have imagined when he first spoke them. Sarah had indeed been safe, not just in that moment, but for the rest of her long, happy life. Safe to heal, safe to love, safe to build and create and flourish. And in providing that safety, Nate had found his own salvation, transforming his lonely existence into something rich and meaningful and deeply worthwhile. It was, the Crawford descendants agreed, whenever they told the story, the very best kind of love story. Not one where everything was easy or where the characters were perfect, but one where two broken people found each other and built something whole. A story where patience and kindness triumphed over fear and pain. A story where love was not just a feeling, but a choice made every single day for 56 years and beyond. And so, the legacy continued. The ranch thrived, and the story lived on. Nate and Sarah Crawford had been dead for decades, but their impact rippled forward through time, in every child taught to be kind, every partnership built on equality and respect, every person who chose courage over fear. They had lived and loved and built something that mattered, and in the end, what more could anyone ask for than that? The sun set over the Crawford Ranch the same way it had for over a century, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold and pink. The horses grazed peacefully in their pastures. The house stood solid and welcoming, windows glowing with warm light. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the rising moon, and the desert night settled over the land with its ancient, eternal peace. And on the porch of the old adobe house, the place where it had all begun, two rocking chairs sat side by side, empty now, but still waiting. Waiting for the next couple who would need a place to build their dreams. Waiting for the next person who would arrive broken and leave whole. Waiting to fulfill the promise that Nate Crawford had made so long ago. The promise that had become the foundation of everything that followed. You are safe here now. Safe, loved, and home at last.